Hey out there, this is Friday, December 29th, 2017, and it is just about 10:32 in the morning here in Northern California. And today I'm going to get into the usual, just about everything, and I kind of wanted the theme to be the question of whether or not humanity at large should have equal rights from birthrights, God-given birthrights, and query into the question of why the precept, the idea of humanity being born free, financially free, included in that freedom, as a birthright, a God-given birthright, is considered such a radical notion by so many. And I strongly contend it's because we've been trained thusly, conditioned, programmed, incrementally, indoctrinated, brainwashed, inculcated, call it what you will, but the fact is that the only reason this paradigm, this money-based, monetary-based so-called reality is so widely accepted is because we've been trained to accept it. But it is, in a nutshell, a scam, because the only basis that history can give us for the invention, the advent of money at all, is as a means to facilitate exchange. So in other words, you had to have something of value to trade, to give, to barter. And the money was a means to make that bartering, trading, exchange easier. But we have devolved so far under the guise of progress, but that's really never even talked about. We just don't define those terms. We bandy them about all the time and talk about how progressives are so bad. You hear this from the conservative camp, right? And without any mention of, coming together with a consensus, a meeting of the minds as to the precise, exact definition of how you're using that term. So there's no wonder why we're all wildly confused. Okay, it's easy to fall into that trap of just accepting things on their face as saying, well, of course it's common sense to just accept the society, accept the system, the establishment, the status quo on its face. There's nothing you can do. You can't go against the flow successfully. You can't buck the system, all that kind of rhetoric and thinking that people have. But indeed, that's exactly what we need to do. If you want change, if you want positive change, if you want progressive change, true progressive change. And we have to come together on what the definition of that change is. And the reason I'm always talking about economic matters is because it goes back to Scripture. All these things are conflated. I'm not conflating them because they, we could conjecture that it needs to be conflated. No, it's conflated because these things are intertwined. The economics and the spiritual well-being of a civilization, which comes down to individuals in that civilization. The love of money is the root of all evil. To fundamentally understand that, the simplicity of that statement, and then just to look at around you and say all the problems in society and realize what they're related to. And so many of our own personal problems are just formed because of looking for a way to escape this so-called reality that's been shoved down our throats, and it's all based on money. Everything's about money. We know that the top people in the world, the rich, the famous, the successful, all these people. Money, that's one thing they have in common. They're very successful, these top politicos. We know they're sycophants for the top money lovers that own the copyright to the money printing presses and all this. It's very sick and twisted. Okay, that's what I want to do, is trying to inspire people to think way, 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 way outside the box. Okay, that's why I do what I do, because I don't hear anybody else out there with a high platform. So I have my little lowly platform, and I don't care that I have a minuscule audience. That's fine, because all it takes is one or two people with influence to latch onto what I'm saying and more coherently, more cogently put it out to the masses, okay, in a way that's palatable, that they can accept. But I believe I've got ideas that are worthy of being out there, and people need to ruminate, and they need to consider them. They need to ponder them. They need to contemplate some of the ideas I'm putting forth as to a means to an end to fix the problems in society, a real progress. And it's all toward freedom, because that's fundamental. That's at the top of the list of being truly happy, okay, is you've got to be free. And who do you have to be free from? These money masters of misery. So all this, so many individual vices and forms of escaping our so-called reality that we find are tied into this pseudo-reality, this faux reality that we're forced to live in. And I'm very curious myself how many of my own personal problems, issues that I don't like, failings, weaknesses that I have would dissipate over time as I saw improvement, steady improvement. I saw light at the end of the tunnel, that nothing was going to stop. It was going to come to fruition. It was coming, and it is. And, this is why I always talk about, I compare this so-called reality as a muddied and bloodied pool of water we're all forced to live in. It's very opaque now at this point in history. And it's without excuse. There's no excuse for no progress, for anti-progress, for all this retrogression and regression. And this relates to our standard of living, okay? It relates to our taxation, the burden, okay? And it's all about money and people not understanding the issues. They're confused. They're ignorant about these issues. The fact that the cost of living is a tax, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no equivocation about that fact. And we've got to understand it. So when I talk about guys like Alex Jones, why it's so important, so imperative, so crucial, so critical, so essential to get through to guys like that, is because of his influence on the public. So people have to be on the same page. They have to be clear. They have to have a consensus, a meeting of the minds as to what progress is in the social, political, economic arena. And when I talk about what a turnoff, when I try to get into creating, being a developer of truly affordable housing, part of, anybody that calls himself a developer has a lot of people out there that are working together in conjunction to make things happen. Nobody does anything on their own. It takes a whole lot of people working together to get a project done. But when I entered into this arena with my California real estate license, 4 years, I got all the schooling, I got the the economic education on the matter, and I went out there and I started investigating what this was going to be like. And I realized how political it was. And I don't mean Democrat, Republican political. I don't mean by, this partisanship. I'm not talking about that. That's small potatoes compared to the kind of politicization I'm talking about, okay? What I mean, it's so horrendous. The reality is so traumatic for me that I wanted nothing to do with the business. Okay, when I found out that indeed it's true that the problems must stay in place. We need chronic, perpetual, growing homelessness in order to extract the exorbitant housing costs. They need people literally to die out in the cold. This is the way they incentivize others to keep paying rents they can't afford, mortgages they can't afford, loans they can't afford, okay? And if you think I'm being cynical, I'm not, okay? I know what the hell I'm talking about here. So you understand that this is a life and death thing. This is not a joke. This is not to be taken lightly when you talk about social, political, and first and foremost, economic matters, because the other things are under the economic policies, okay, that are instituted in the land, and it all has to do with this prevailing prevalent currency that we all use, and it's all measured in dollars. Everything, Bitcoin is measured in dollars, and gold and silver and oil, everything has a dollar amount. Stocks, bonds, you name it, it's dollars. The Federal Reserve note. And it's so important to understand that without sound economic policies, we're not going anywhere. And if the masses are confused and ignorant and disempowered because of that, there's no way. They can't put their foot down because they don't even know what they're doing. They don't even know what they're putting their foot down against, or what they're standing up for. Okay? And I'm trying to explain that in very nuts and bolts, mathematic, logical, childlike means, okay, of understanding that what you're looking for is a less burden. You're looking for freedom. So how do you define freedom? Yes, you've got to have less burden. Progress. Okay, so that's progress. You have less burden. So what does less burden have to do with money? As your currency increases in worth due to supply and demand, which is the most fundamental capitalist precept out there. Unless you've got an honest free market supply and demand economy in place, you don't have true capitalism. And anything else is just phony capitalism, pseudo-capitalism, faux capitalism, crony capitalism. Okay, and this is how they create communism, is they make people hate capitalism because they say, well, crony capitalism, it has capitalism in the name, but it doesn't matter. Okay, it doesn't, like Shakespeare said, I mean, what are we talking about? Words are important. You've got to understand that people use words to defame, to besmirch, to frame up like a false flag. Okay, that's what's going on here. I mean, people talk about all these libtards and stuff. Well, how do you know they're not just paid provocateurs to besmirch and defame a good, true, classic liberal? Okay? I mean, let's define these terms, what they mean, because otherwise we're just all in Babylon. We're all talking confusion and nonsense. We don't know, up from down, right from wrong, left from right. I mean, it's just, it's madness. But, here I am, like I'm some weirdo that's talking all radical. This guy says that he's a conservative. He says that, he believes in conservative fiscal prudency, but yet he believes in some minimum guaranteed income and all this. I say, look, there's more than one way to skin a cat. I say you've got to protect the soundness of the currency, okay? So I am opposed to cost of living inflation. So I'd be against a minimum guaranteed income if it were allowed to create more inflation. Okay, but I don't want people being blamed like minimum wage workers for cost of living inflation, which is now what's going on, is that they're saying, oh, well, we give minimum wage workers a raise, you understand that's going to cause inflation. But all this time, we've had this wanton inflation, cost of living inflation, a tax, over half a century now, since the assassination of JFK, and minimum wage has fallen way behind it. There has not been a commensurate, proportional, equivalent adjustment, a cost of living adjustment to the minimum wage. So there's no way you can blame minimum wage unless you're out of your mind, or you're a liar, or you're an idiot. I mean, there's no way. You just can't. You just put two and two together and you say, no, I cannot blame minimum wage workers for this problem, because the buying power of a minimum wage job has fallen woefully behind the cost of living. Okay, so there's just no argument there, and I just want people to get it. This stuff's not hard. It's like I talk about a child and a pack of gum. You could keep it that simple. You say to the child, you understand you understand the difference between progress and regress. Progress is a good thing. This is something that is you want. It's desirable. Progress, a good thing, right? And this is why it's good. It leads to freedom, right? Because that's good. Freedom is good because in order to be happy, first and foremost, you've got to be free. So the child understands economics at a very early age. If they get an allowance at 5 years old, okay, when I got 50 cents a week, my sisters and I in 1963, okay, 50 cents a week, or even I was still getting 50 cents when I was like 7. So we're talking about 1965. 50 cents a week, I mean, it'd still buy you a rabbit's foot keychain and some candy, and a few other little things maybe. Okay, but the point was that minimum wage at that time was a buck and a half an hour. Okay, by the way. But the buying power of that minimum wage job, you could support your whole family. You could pay a mortgage on a house, pay your insurance, your car, and expenses, and all the expenses.